right, initiative that would depend on philanthropic giving or government support, and which ones will just carry on, perhaps in this case a thought collective, as an independently owned, private, independent entity without any need to go beyond itself for outside fundraising. So I think that would probably define where these social enterprises then start to hit in terms of the kind of sponsors and funding that they turn to.
I think your question is a very good one, and it actually takes on a number of different perspectives depending on where you begin looking at it. You started by asking, how would we identify social innovations that would then take off into a business viable entity? There are already two components there. How do you identify social innovation? And then secondary to that, can it ever become a viable business entity, right? And then the next part of your question was about identification. And the question, therefore, is who identifies? Is it that somebody somewhere is expected to identify in order to support and to grow and to invest? Or is it that it is self-identified by an organic ground-up movement of people who try many different ideas, create different social innovations, some of whom develop into viable social enterprises, thereby attracting the attention of investors who are simply casting their eye about the field? And I think the answer obviously has to come from multiple directions as well. Let's first look at the social innovator. In my view, social innovation is a ground-up activity because it begins with people who are passionate about solving a problem of a social nature, a need of the world, something that has engaged their hearts, their consciences, something which has made it imperative for them to try and solve in order to alleviate suffering or to bring dispossessed people back into the fold in some way or another. And because the motivation is a very humanistic motivation, it is not a financial motivation, the base of this is necessarily quite different from the base of sparking a business idea. For example, if you're going to start a business, you might actually say, okay, what kind of work or what kind of product or service is likely to make me the most money in the given time frame for my business plan? But that's not how a social innovator works. A social innovator has become aware of an issue that requires urgent attention and then turns his or her mind to trying to solve that problem. So I think the basis on which we begin is not about the money. And it is only a subset of social innovation that ends up being about the money. And I think that is not necessarily wrong. Because at the end of the day, as Ben, you say correctly, you will be left with a field with a large spectrum of organizations and a large spectrum of support. And there are those organizations that are purely service providing, there are those organizations which are self-sustaining, there are those organizations which are, in the business sense, worth investing in. And then you've got the financiers who are, on the one hand, perfectly happy to give grants for service, those who are perfectly happy to have to give out support grants with no return on investment, and those who require a financial return on investment on these grants that are given out. So with the three levels of social innovation, the three levels of financial support, you can merge them in any sorts of ways, couldn't you?
Okay, well, Chiu, let me take that up a notch and also turn to Shiao in the process. You asked about who identifies if a social innovation or social initiative is investable or grows to a point where it is a business initiative. Well, let me pull back a little bit and let's use the word social innovation financiers, right, or social innovation funders, who could be grant organizations like Lien Foundation, could be government, could be the owners and the founders of the social enterprise, as well as the private sector coming in as pure social investors. Now, if I turn to you, Shiao, when you and your friends started your initiative, where did you decide or find a balance between how much are we going to put in our own money, and what do we want to turn to grant giving organizations? Do we want this to be self-financing? Do we want to look outside of us into external third-party investors? And how would you, as Chiu says, put together that mix? And what was some thinking that came out of that?
Okay, I'm going to give you an honest answer. Okay, so when we are not business people. We don't speak in business terms. So when we wanted to start up the company, we didn't think of business plans. And I suppose this gives you an insight into how a social entrepreneur and innovator thinks. We just wanted an option that was the most fun and the most free and the most in control. And that's why we never wanted to take in anyone's money, because once you take in someone's money, especially at an early stage when you yourself have no idea what you're really doing, it's just such a pain. So I actually, when I think about how we have a lot of young people who come up to us now with their ideas, and then they're saying like, I want to run this as a business, and do you think it's cool and all that? And if we see it as cool, I honestly think we would invest in it without really asking, can I see your business plan? Can what's the rate of investment, all that? When we started the business, and even 10 years on, I think the mindset we've always had is you must be prepared to lose it all. It doesn't matter. As in, results matter, but they don't matter that much. For us, we look at the person, we think, does this person have the character to build a business that will last? We look at whether this person has perseverance, whether this person has a healthy appetite for risk, not an unhealthy one. And I think if we find that person, we haven't found one yet, but if we find that, it's true. I mean, because you have nice kids and all that, but after a while you realize that, no, it's not going to work, come back like 5 years later, you know. But I think if we find that mix, I guess if we find someone that reminds us of us, we would be quite happy to give the money, and because we know how our own journey was, I don't really care if your whole company busts at the end of the day, because we could have busted any time. Yeah, so yeah, that's what we'd look for, actually.
Thank you, and I'm going to turn to Aaron. Actually, listening to the conversation, those of you out there who are from the private sector, financial, capital markets, there's a lot of similarity, I think, in terms of what we are thinking and talking about too. So there are private businesses that the founders or the owners will continue to plow in money, right, even though it may not give you the returns, and they would never look to external investors because they want to keep full control, right? There are also those who would go to angel funds that would look for money coming in and are happy to be guided by an investor who has the experience, right, to help give them a leg up. And I think that cuts across for business as well as for social enterprise. But Aaron, I'm going to turn to you and ask you, we do a lot of work in Singapore Inc., right, ANC, both in terms of government funding to encourage entrepreneurship, whether it's entrepreneurial thinking amongst the kids in the schools, or through, for example, Spring Singapore has got a seed capital that sponsors innovation, out of the inventions that come out of the polytechnics. EDB has got different grants, and the various organizations within the government and government-related agencies have got different ways to fund, right, innovation. Now, how much of that funding policy or funding platform would be applicable to social innovation funding, where it's not a handout, not an MCYS grant, right, but one that invests, that funds, I'm not going to use the word invest yet, funds, finances a social innovation with, I think both Chiu and Shiao have mentioned, the risk that it might not work, with the risk that nobody's done it in this space. It hasn't been commissioned by anybody, right, and you've got a group of well-hearted people, altruistic in their thinking, wanting to respond to a social need, and coming up with one big grand idea. So is that a tension in terms of how we put together the financing platform within Singapore that could attract that kind of social innovation?
I think this is a constant work in progress in a lot of ways. And I referred earlier to learning new languages. And I think that's a theme that I'll come back to now, because I suspect one of the tensions that's at work is not so much, whether it's binary yes or no to social innovation, but the fact that a lot of the languages in the different communities are not familiar yet with each other. I'm not sure government has learned yet, and although it is trying very hard to do this learning, that a lot of the metrics for measuring the value of social entrepreneurship will not necessarily come from easily quantifiable, tangible things. And that's why I think the work that IIX is doing in trying to come up with an equally rigorous way of measuring social value, but that isn't the same as measuring economic value, is quite critical. That will take time to percolate through both business and government, I think, as a way of thinking, but it's important that we start doing that now. Particularly in the Singapore that exists today, which is dealing not just with easily quantifiable challenges in terms of public value for its citizens, but has to deal with a lot of intangible things as well. Deep issues of where is our identity? Are we a critical thinking nation? What are we actually? Those are not things that can be measured in terms of GDP. GDP is important, but it is far, far, far from sufficient. So I do think that that learning of the language needs to happen. I don't think there is a preclusion in existing funding mechanisms for socially innovative material and projects, but I don't think that enough of that has spoken the language or a language that is familiar to the grant evaluators and those who are giving out the approvals for these fundings. And that mutual learning of the language, I think, needs to happen a lot more. It needs to happen in particular because of what Chiu said, which is that a lot of this is not just about the money. The money is actually a fraction of a much larger ecosystem and a much larger infrastructure that is at work.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to open up to the floor and ask if anyone has got a question or comment in response to what's been said, or a rejoinder or rebuttal to some of our panelists. Anyone from the floor? Hands up or a little sheet of paper to get passed down. Thank you. Here's one gentleman on my right.
I have a feeling that my expectation on this plenum and discussion in the plenum are really different. My expectation was to find some answers why Singapore is the right place to establish something like a social stock exchange or a platform for trading investors and enterprises. I didn't hear that. So why Singapore is the right place? Of course, there are good reasons. Yeah? You have an airport, which is accessible to everybody. You have you have a capital market, which is for Asia quite well developed. Many people, or basically everybody, can come here without a visa, so it's easy. It's a hub anyway. If you travel to Asia, you have to, basically because of Singapore Airlines, you have to stop. But there should be something more. Yeah? Maybe you have a very good internet platform, so internet is working in this country. Yeah? That's also important. I mean, these are the real reasons. So, but there has to be something more. What I hear from you, from the culture, I think it's not what I expected. So I expect there are entrepreneurs who have money and can put that into social enterprises, for example. That could be a good reason. Are there such investors in Singapore which we can meet? Or another reason could be perhaps there is a very vibrant social enterprise environment. It's not there in Singapore, I think. It's much more in India. It's much more perhaps in the Philippines or in Thailand for sure. Yeah. So what are the reasons that we should come to Singapore to start our IIX?
Thank you, and you speak my heartbeat. I'm going exactly in that direction. I would like to, let me pose that to my panelists, right? I would like to exactly ask, if Singapore, the local community, is not able to support or generate the kind of social innovative enterprises that can come forth and be invested, if Singapore local investors, the local investing community in Singapore doesn't think in those terms, then when we say building the Singapore hub as a center for attracting social innovation, are we looking at Singapore being a hub for external investors and external social enterprises that basically use Singapore as a trading hub and an offshore, shall I use the word offshore trading hub for a social enterprise stock exchange, for capital markets that go into the projects. And the projects that are all listed on our social enterprise stock exchange are from Indonesia, from Thailand, from China, from India, and not much from Singapore. I would also respond to that gentleman and say, I think whether or not we come to a point where we have a local stock exchange in Singapore that allows us to trade social enterprise depends also on the regulatory environment and whether or not the relevant government organizations think that way and set up the platform to allow for that. And that's where I think we would be interfacing very much with the local community, and to what extent the local community across Aaron said, Aaron, you mentioned the word multi-sectoral involvement, could come together. So I would really like to open that up to the floor and to the panelists and say, where then can we begin to interact with the foreign wealth management community that's here at our doorstep in Singapore. How can we partner with not just the government, not just NGOs, but also with the big international investment banks, the private banks that are with us here, that use Singapore as an Asia-Pac-based office, that speak to clientele, ultra-high net worths in the region with money who are already of the mindset that they're willing to invest in social enterprise. Will Singapore be left out of the game and we're just basically a platform for outsiders to use us as a convenient trading hub?
I agree with you totally that if we think of social enterprise in a certain way, with a certain fixed set of mindsets, then yes, we don't see as vibrant a scene in Singapore as we see in India and the Philippines. And without being critical here, I think there are very different sets of governance experiences that we see in all those countries. Some people argue that in Singapore, the government has done so much in terms of providing for human value that there are very few gaps left that need to be filled by either active citizen groups or socially innovative groups or even business performing some kind of philanthropy. And I think that lack of gap is one aspect that we see. But does that then translate to necessarily no social enterprise at all? That I'm not sure is the case, because we actually do have different kinds of social entrepreneurship examples that take place depending on where a place's developmental state happens to be. So, great urban cities like New York and London, for instance, have different kinds of social innovation taking place compared to what we see occurring in places like India and the Philippines. And I think what we see is the restlessness in places like Singapore being channeled towards what I often like to call the problems of high-density urban living. They may appear a little bit further up on Maslow's hierarchy of human needs, but they are nonetheless quite critical needs as well. These are often needs of bringing diverse communities together, finding ways for people of different identities, whether those are racial or religious ones, to come together and dialogue with each other, to form new kinds of social capital. Those may not be the same as meeting poverty eradication needs in other parts of the world, but I do think they are equally valid examples of social innovation. So having said that, the question then becomes why a place like Singapore could be an interesting one to experiment with in terms of things like social stock exchanges. I actually think that the fact that there is a big and broad governance infrastructure to build on is a plus in that respect, because it means that you're not trying to recreate the basic acts of governance, you're working off a system that broadly has worked in meeting human needs. It can do better, and it's trying to, in terms of infusing design principles in what it does, and make sure that it meets genuine human preferences. But I think the base is there and has already been worked off. The other reason that I think Singapore is interesting is I think it offers a laboratory for experimentation, given that it is quite a compact governance entity. It is able to coordinate across not just the government agencies, but the different sectors that I talked about earlier, precisely because we do most things in a fairly small geographical space. And I think a lot of experimentation can take place in that sort of lab before we try and generalize these principles for much larger geographically spread out entities. The third reason is that Singapore is both a city and a country, and I think it therefore gives us a space to experiment not just with potentially national platforms, but with a space that is all about catering to urban living as well. And there I think we are able to find very practical ways of making existing governance systems work, because we are dealing not just with national priorities, but also very local and municipal human welfare concerns. Benjamin Barber is going to put a book out later this year called What If Mayors Ran the World? Right? And the whole idea behind that is actually a lot of the most interesting innovation and the most practical ways in which government affects lives happens at the city level, because that's often where you don't find yourself burdened by ideological baggage. And I think one of the key ways that Singapore can contribute to this debate is by being both country and city at the same time, so that our experiments can be nationalized at some point, but also take place in other cities around the world.
Let me draw a parallel, Aaron, from what you're saying, as well as to throw it to the floor, those of you who are further down the line in this story. Let me draw a parallel. Quite a few years ago, Singapore was competing very hard with Hong Kong to be the first to come up with a carbon derivatives exchange. And there was a lot of talk around carbon footprint, the Kyoto Protocol, and the local community wasn't really very much in the know of that. And the fact that we were, well, I say we, the government then, were pitching very hard to form our own carbon derivatives stock exchange was something that was created for, I would dare say, the regional, the international market around us, rather than for the local community. And there was obviously also a discussion recently, rightly or wrongly, I will not say, that Singapore has one of the highest carbon footprints in the world as a city. Now, it is possible, I dare say, it is possible for Singapore to become a hub for social enterprise investing, completely separate and not from the local community. The government and the relevant banking community could set that up, provide a platform. People outside the region could come, trade, do what they need here, and nobody needs to wait for the local Singapore community, of Singapore entrepreneurs, the government, the NGOs and the like, to come up to speed to be involved in the game. And Singapore could well be that hub, just like that. Why? I come from a background where there are other cities in Asia that would compete very hard for that hub. Right, so the gentleman there who mentioned all the things that reason why Singapore is a good hub, Hong Kong could fight for that, Shanghai could fight for that, Bangkok could increasingly fight for that. Anyone in the audience that has got a take on why Singapore is a hub? What do you need to see, what do you want to see in Singapore that would make you choose or identify Singapore as the hub for a center for attracting social innovation? What are the missing pieces? Where would you like to see some involvement? I've got somebody at the back who's put up their hand. Come on up front if you can. We've got 10 minutes, 15 minutes, so we can take some good interaction from the floor, okay?
Thanks for that exercise. Okay, I'm just referring to an article that I saw which says donations hit high despite economic slowdown a couple of days ago in the local newspaper here. So I saw it on the flight coming in, and I'm pretty fascinated by that. I come from India, and thanks for those comments on India, but we see a huge demand there, but we are seeing a huge supply side here. And there must be a way to create these bridges, especially in the virtual world. And so I'm excited by seeing the prospect. And I come from Grameen. I run the Grameen Capital India office, which is looking at really bringing bridges between the bottom of the pyramid, mainstream capital markets. And when you're talking about headlines like this, we're seeing clearly huge opportunities here. So for me, this is a great indication of why Singapore and how we build those bridges is left to people like us here sitting in this room.
Thank you very much. I work very closely with State Bank of India Capital, and I understand a lot of the issues there, but I will make a distinction for all of us here. The fact that donation levels are up doesn't mean that we've got people willing to invest in social enterprises as an investor. There is a difference between philanthropic giving and social investment. Yes, the gentleman over there.
Yeah, hi, good morning. Maybe if I can just add something. My name is Lucas. I work for a company based here called Olam. We are in agricultural commodity trading, but we also work a lot with communities around the world. Currently, we work with about 1.2 million farmers all around the world. We're in 64 countries. We're headquartered here. We're listed on the Singapore Stock Exchange. There's quite a few companies housed here in Singapore with our kind of profile. One of the reasons is the Singapore government has tried to encourage a lot of these trading houses to set up here. We're not the largest, but we're one of the few that's actually listed publicly. The companies larger than us, housed in the US or other places normally tend to be private enterprise. The point being is companies like us would be very interested to see if there's a way in which we can get involved in impact investing as part of our core business. I mean, we have all the normal issues on finding investable projects or communities that's got business plans that is in line with our risk profile. But that being said, our risk profile is pretty high. So if you ask the question why I think Singapore is a very good hub for these kind of activities, it's because exactly of that. There's companies like ours based here that's very interested to engage in this field.
Thank you very much. I do know of other companies of your profile and family offices that invest heavily in this. My own belief is that Singapore is already such a social investing hub. But as we look at building Singapore as a social investing hub, I would throw the question to the floor, what else needs to be in place? What else is missing in the mix? We hear a lot about what we are, right? The gentleman over there. Sorry. Okay, the gentleman over here, and then after that, over to my left.
I was just going to remark, I'm Matt Gamzer, I'm from IFC, and for the last 5 years I've been a Hong Konger, so I'm well responding to the... I would say that why Singapore, and this is me as an individual, this is not a position of the IFC, but if we're talking about where we can have social enterprises and social entrepreneurship, we can have them anywhere. If we're really focusing on where we can create something that can help aggregate capital and distribute it, effectively, then we need openness and transparency. And then if we really run that comparison around this region of the world, I'm sorry, but where I live, Shanghai, forget it, compared to here. So I think the most powerful argument for why we should focus on Singapore is because of the governance, because of the openness and transparency of the way capital markets run here. And if we can combine that with an equal openness and transparency in the way we measure the social dimension, then I think we really can, more so than anywhere in the world, combine the attractiveness and combine being close physically to where both the demand is and where the new capital is coming. And that's I think what why this initiative is so exciting, and why I think we should focus on Singapore. I mean, maybe selfishly, because my organization's not going to invest into Singapore under any circumstances, but we love this region because there's so many poor people. I think it should be we should be talking about this hub for working around the whole region, where really the problem is largely outside Singapore. But if this can help catalyze social investment, social entrepreneurial spirit in Singapore, well, so be it. Let it be inclusive. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. This gentleman over here.
Hi, everyone. My name is Peter. I'm from Shanghai originally. It's nice to hear that
Asia's world cities are all coming here.
Yeah, but I've been living in Singapore for 6+ years now, and I'm a social enterprise providing service to the local social enterprise. I'd just like to respond to that gentleman's sort of statement. I think, and I agree that Singapore may not have the same types or breeds of the social enterprise as similar as India or Philippines, but I do think Singapore have very different and vibrant social entrepreneurs. If you talk to my clients, there are different types. May not be microfinance, may not be helping the poor, but they're helping people to, like Shiao, transform how people think. Like some of the social enterprise inspire people to take on adventures, to learn about themselves, and transform and tell the stories to inspire the community. So I would like to, ask people to consider, there are social enterprises in Singapore, and constantly we are wondering where are the impact investors. So I guess my question, taking that perspective, my question to the panel will be, Aaron talked about, how do we speak the same language? How do we get investors, policymakers, social entrepreneurs, to learn and get to know each other and speak the language? So my question would be, what's your perspective about how to make that happen? Thank you.
Okay, before I get my panel to answer, I think there are a few definitions that might be worthwhile teasing out here, just to clarify our discussion. I think we're talking about Singapore as a hub, Singapore hub as a platform, versus Singapore hub as a market, versus Singapore hub as a local fundraising location. And I think a lot of the people in the audience are speaking about Singapore as a hub, as a platform, versus Singapore as a market that you would look at possible social enterprise projects that comes out of Singapore that you would invest in. I think there's a lot of capital in Singapore. I would use the word expat capital. I think we're asking, is there enough in the local domestic community for there to be local impact investors, local capital that we can raise within Singapore for the kind of projects that we're talking about? And I think we're talking about three very different things. So back to my panel, I've got about 6 minutes left for us to do a quick rejoinder from each one. Singapore as a hub, as a platform, Singapore as a market, right, and Singapore as a fundraising locality. So perhaps I could start with Shiao.
Okay, I think I'll just share two insights that I have about why I think Singapore has the potential to be a Silicon Valley of social enterprise. Yeah, that's a vision I have for Singapore. I think one, we are so small and so stable and so rich that it's practically like 1 or half a degree of separation. I always tell young social entrepreneurs that you are living in one of the few cities where if you really, really wanted to see the Prime Minister, it could just happen like that. You don't have to go through many, many layers, because we're such a small country and someone always knows someone who always knows someone, and you only need 1 degree of separation and that's it. So a lot of big change can happen very, very fast. So I always think once you have a really, really good idea, money and support is not an issue. And I think many practitioners, social entrepreneurs on the ground who are successful will tell you the same thing. They are not worried about money, they're not worried about support. They're just worried about whether the idea is there. So I think the potential for a change to happen fast is there. Everything is all laid out. The second thing which I see is among the community of friends that I have, who are all interested in this kind of thing. It's true. We don't have many social enterprises of a certain kind, like you see in India and China and all that. You do see a growing number of Singaporean social entrepreneurs who are interested in doing social enterprises overseas. They have developed a heart for Asia. So they don't really want to start social enterprises in Singapore per se, but they want to start them overseas. And for some reason, I don't think they are the ones getting much attention. Not many people know about them, but they are a growing number and they are very good. And that's what I have to add.
Thank you, Xiaoyan. Chiu.
Thanks. I think I would like to support the idea of Singapore being a social innovation hub by looking at it from two different perspectives. One is from the perspectives of government and policy. And from that perspective, those of us who know Singapore well know that once we've decided to do something, we tend to do it very well, and we tend to succeed, and we tend to pull everybody along with us eventually. I have no doubt in my mind that if at the government level, to start with, if there is a desire to make Singapore a hub for social innovation and for impact investment, just as there has been a desire to make Singapore a hub for global non-profit organizations coming to Singapore as our base, I believe that the infrastructure will be set up, and I believe that the support structures will be there to enable this to happen, and that we will succeed. I'm not worried that Singapore is a small place. In fact, I agree with Xiaoyan. This is perhaps an advantage for us because of a very tight network of a community here, as well as connections we make with not only funders and social innovators within the country, but also overseas. But we have lots of examples of homegrown industries, if you like, that don't necessarily depend on a domestic market for their success, and that their success depends on hubbing in Singapore, being based in Singapore, but operating globally. I mean, you know, it's obvious if you think about examples like Singapore Airlines, Singtel, DBS Bank, Singapore entities that nonetheless do not depend on a very small domestic market. And that, of course, is the economic market. The market for social enterprise in Singapore, as Aaron has said, is also quite small because the gaps left by the government are few and far in between. And yet, launching into the region and launching beyond is a way in which we can maximize our benefit to the region and also to bring a certain vibrancy of social innovation into a small place that doesn't have a domestic market for it. The second perspective I want to talk about, and I'll end with this, is that the intention to build the foundation of social innovation, social entrepreneurship, social enterprise is very strong in the Singaporean community, amongst social innovators, amongst educational institutes, amongst schools. And if I just look specifically at the center which I work with, which is the Lien Center for Social Innovation at SMU, how we do this is firstly by research at the meta level, as well as by education. We work through the universities, we work through philanthropists, and we are also interested in working with impact investors. We do not, of course, ourselves invest, because we're not an investment house. But we feel that organizations like the Lien Center, working together in Singapore through this network, this tight network that we have, will very quickly saturate society with the necessary awareness, knowledge, competencies, and attitudes that will allow social innovation to flourish. At the same time, we will be able to bring on board and educate philanthropists and investors as how best they can participate in this field as well. So I'm quite optimistic about our prospects for Singapore Hub. Thank you.
Thank you, Chiu. Aaron.
Great. I'll respond to the question about how we learn each other's language, because I was quite struck by that. In a lot of ways, I think there is growing value in convening platforms that bring groups together. I mean, I can think of a time, 10 years ago, where the measure of the value of a conference or of a forum would have been on how focused it was on a particular discipline. And I think what we're finding now is the growing porosity between disciplinary boundaries, such that we do need to have these interdisciplinary or intersector conversations. And the convening platforms can take place at many different levels. I think groups like this are a critical one, and I think us coming together for conversations is really important. I suspect one of the reasons the panels are just an hour long is so that we can have lots of coffee time to facilitate those conversations. I think groups like the Lien Center are critical as well, because they bring people together from diverse backgrounds and diverse sectors to have these critical conversations. I remember something, Chiu, that your team did last year, where they did a workshop on design with the Young Foundation, right? The Global Innovation Academy, which brought together members of civil society, people from business, people from government, all working with each other, seeing how they shape their projects, but also in the process, learning each other's vocabularies. Doreen and I are part of a group called the Asia 21 Young Leaders Program that's led by the Asia Society in the US. And that, again, brings people from very diverse backgrounds together so that they can have conversations. And even if it's just for a couple of days, I think the online interaction that happens after that is one that facilitates the building of quite significant social capital. And once that common language is there, I think those groups act as translators between the different sectors. People often ask me, are you a government person, or are you, do you do more community work? And I hate that question, because it's such an unnecessarily limiting one. I mean, can we not be both? And when you are both, can you then not be the translator between different sectors so that the vocabularies become more mutually familiar? I do think that that's critical, because once that happens, then the kinds of networked effects that both Chiu and Yin talked about, as well as Ben, right, can start to take place. But we need to have that language for the network to have conversations with itself.
Okay, Aaron, just before you put down your microphone, we're going to end off with a personal impact initiative commitment that each one of you will make in front of everyone. Yeah. So in a simple one-liner each, I'd like to hear, Aaron, why don't you end off by saying what your impact initiative commitment is going to be.
Sure. I had one, but I'm going to change it now, because after listening to this panel, what has struck me is that I think we need even more platforms for the kind of language learning that I just talked about to take place. I do some work with our Youth Council Academy, as Ben mentioned earlier, and our key program there is what we call our National Young Leaders Program, where each year we pick about 20 people who are already involved with some kind of social innovation in quite a significant organizational capacity, and help them make the leap to bringing their organizations one level up. And I think what I want to commit to doing is make sure that that group is as diverse as possible this year, and that they learn the language that each of them can bring to be as rich as possible in their eventual social innovative outcomes.
Okay, well done. I will monitor you on that, right? Thank you. Chiu, what is your commitment?
Well, I had thought of one too, but having heard what Aaron said, I think I'll change mine as well. But more to tie in with what Aaron said, I feel that the development of the language and understanding of social innovation is very important as a very baseline foundation for developing this field. So through my work with the Lien Center, my commitment is therefore to work much harder with the center and its partners in order to bring about this awareness and education through research, such as what we're doing in the philanthropic field, and also research projects in the social finance field. We commit to bringing people together and to understanding the issues and sharing experiences, so that as a society we can then grow this area of commitment as a whole.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Xiaoyin, what is your commitment?
Okay, I'll share two. One is for food for thought, our restaurant business. A big question we always get is, when are you opening the next restaurant? Do you want to franchise it overseas and all that? And it drives me crazy, because I'm not interested in that. But what we're interested in is, how do you do a franchise that actually benefits people and doesn't just benefit you, and makes profit for them but not for you? And we see a lot of food-based social enterprises, like soup kitchens or people trying to like help people get employed through using restaurant business. We see a lot of them coming up in Singapore, they're not a very high profile. They need a lot of help and all that. So I want to experiment with how do we use our Food for Thought brand to bring up the profile and the business of these guys. So we will, I will say in faith that this year we will bring up one. We will bring up one NGO. And we're looking at a small group called Soul Food, which I don't think anyone in here has heard of, but they're amazing. They run a little kitchen in Commonwealth Avenue, and it is a father who has personally coached his mentally disabled son to cook, and he cooks so well. And he cooks so well that he trained 8 other kids, and nobody knows about him. And I think we're going to try and help bring up his profile. The second thing that I would like to do personally is, just last month, I heard an American photographer make a big pitch to his audience, and he said, I have this big vision of wanting to run a socially conscious international hotel chain, and I see like hotel rooms where you walk in and then you see a picture of a kid that this room supports, all the toiletries are from social enterprises, and you see documentaries that bring your attention to the world, and I have this great vision, and I have no money to do it. And I'm just putting it out there, so anyone who wants to help me, just give me an email. And when I heard that, I thought, that's a pretty cool challenge. How do you run an international hotel chain that's socially conscious with no money? And I thought, Airbnb.
There you
go.
And
I was just thinking, I would like to actually run an experiment, and I will email him about it. And I think this year will be the year that I'll start one. It'll be quite interesting.
Thank you so much, Xiao Yin. I wasn't asked to make a commitment, but I think it's only fair that I do. So I will also say that I work in the region with quite an extensive group of corporate financiers, and I'd love to be able to bring at least 3 of them to Impact Exchange as impact partners to invest in some of the projects that we have, and see if we can get the stock exchange going, right? So that's my commitment to you, Doreen, and to the community here. I'm going to end this session today. We've gone a little bit over time, but if I could just do a quick summary in 3 layers. I'd say at the top layer that Singapore already is and can be that hub that I think the larger investing community is looking for. So let's just make that happen, work with Impact Impact Exchange, Impact Partners, work with the relevant regulatory authorities, and let's just get going. I'd like to see more of us work with the local business community, the local entrepreneurs in Singapore, to look at Singapore as a possibility for fundraising. And I think the last one, I'd love to see if more of us could work with our panelists here to make Singapore a potential market that we could be looking at investing in as well. And I think those 3 tiers probably covers and sums up a lot of our discussion for today. So thank you once again, panelists. Thank you, MCYS, for sponsoring this plenary today, and thank you all of you for being a part of this today. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much for that fantastic panel. And if we could ask you to stay for just 30 more seconds, that would be great. Aaron, I loved what you said about the porosity of walls and sectors that previously were perhaps impenetrable. And it's exactly forums like this and conversations like the one we just heard that are so useful and so valuable in breaking those walls down. On behalf of IIX and Shujog, we would like to present a small token of our appreciation to each of our panelists and our moderator for this wonderful session, and for all the work that you do each day. So thank you. Please join me again in thanking our panel. Great. We have just a couple more announcements as we close this session. Thank you. What was so valuable, again, about that conversation was not only the honest stories and the probing questions that we've heard just now, but also the actions, as Ben so wonderfully rounded up from each of our panelists and himself, that they make, that they will make over the next year, and also that they and each of you is making every day to make change, to challenge, and to have impact. And I think that gives us great material to launch from as we go into our morning breakout sessions, which will begin shortly at 10:45. At 11. So thank you. So we'll give you a little break in between. Again, track A, it's all in the family office. We'll be next door, in the building next door. in the Kent Ridge Guild House inner chamber on the ground floor. Another Track A session is new developments in social venture funds, which will be right back here in this room. And Track AB, Planting the Seeds for Impact, will again be in the building next door, upstairs in the Clooney room. And again, for each of these tracks, we're really going to focus on, as Ben did here with the panel, on the action initiatives that everyone will take over the next year. So we're looking forward to that. The IAX and Shujug team will actually be collecting those actions and helping each of you follow up to make those actions a reality. And also, actually right across the way at 11 o'clock will be Impact Academy. So if you have already signed up for that, definitely make your way there. It's in seminar room 1. And if you haven't signed up for it and are interested, please do find out from a staff member outside. It's first come, first serve, and I know it'll be a terrific session. For today's food and drink, in addition to the coffee breaks, lunch today will be back where we had it yesterday, next door in the Guild House banquet room, on the ground floor. It's free seating today, so catch up with old friends and continue making new ones. And we'll have closing cocktails tonight from 6 to 7, also next door on the ground floor. Well, we'll very much look forward to toasting all of you. Again, throughout the day, if you are tweeting, don't forget to add our hashtag ImpactForum2012. And as you leave the auditorium, please do remember to check out the beautiful paintings on sale. It's an investment not only in art, but in empowerment and progress. Thank you again to Rika and the Global Women Forum for providing those. And with that, we close this first plenary for today. Thank you so much, and ignite your morning. Thank you.